our study sessions for this evening. So our first study session is the Marketplace Redevelopment Parcel C. Can we have the staff report, please?
Good evening, Chairman Moss, Planning Commission. This is a study session on the Marketplace Redevelopment Project, Parcel C. The Commission has been seeing a number of study sessions on this project, and this is the proposed build-out. And just as a quick reminder of the various parcels, today we'll be talking about Parcel C. In the past, you have seen the proposal for Parcel C in conjunction with Parcel B and the realignment of the Shell Mount Street. And you've been seeing study sessions individually on Parcel A, the Shell Mount site building, the residential building, and Parcel D, which is the theater residential building. In January, you saw a study session on the Shell Mount realignment as well as parcels B and C. At this point, the applicant has revised its phasing, and I'll talk about that. In terms of how it's actually going to pan out in construction, the first thing that's going to happen on the ground is the relocation of the Shell Mount Street. This will be followed by construction of the grocery store, which is on Parcel C, and that would be without the residential component that is associated with the grocery store. The third item would be the construction of the redesigned and expanded Christie Avenue Park, which the Commission has approved in the past, earlier this year. This would be followed by construction of parcels A, D, and then the residential component of Parcel C. And the last stage would be constructions of Parcel B, which is the garage building, and the retail pad, which is known as Parcel F. So Today, what we are going to be talking about is only Parcel C, which is the grocery store plus residential development associated with that, as well as the realignment of the Shell Mount Street. In terms of the past study sessions, in December of 2013, you first saw the first study session on this project, and that included both Parcel C and B. This was followed by another study session in December a year later, which was on the overall scheme of the proposed Marketplace Redevelopment Project. Then in January of this year, you saw a FTP study session for Parcel B and C and the realignment road. And today we are looking at only at Parcel C and the road realignment. And this FTP, which would be consisting of Parcel C and the road realignment, is at this point tentatively scheduled for the May Planning Commission hearing. So the current proposal for Parcel C is a 30,000 square feet grocery store, much like what you saw at the January study session, in a small 2,100 square feet of retail. And the final residential count is 69 residential units. The division of studios and 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, you can see on the screen in front of you. And about 62% of the total units are studios and 1-bedroom, and 38% are 2-bedrooms and 3-bedrooms. So this is the site plan for this FTP, which shows the realigned Shell Mount Street, which is right here, and it also shows the current configuration of the street. And you have Parcel C, which is the grocery store, and it's got a residential on 62nd Street and Market Drive. So essentially, that's not changed. What you're going to be looking at today is more refined proposal for this project, and I'll go through the various modifications that the applicant has made in response to the comments that they heard at the January study session. So this is the Parcel C rendering, and this is the first floor or the ground floor plan, where you have the grocery store in red, and you have townhouses on 62nd Street and on Market Drive. So in terms of modifications, what you see today is a reorganized loading to separate grocery reloading from the customer resident vehicular traffic. There would be a truck bay, would have a gate that would be closed a majority of the time. There's further defined loading areas for the grocery store on 63rd Street, and truck templates have been provided in the packet. This was directly in response to how the loading would occur and whether that was feasible or not. You also have a circulation plans that more clearly shows the operation of loading, service, and trash pickup, as well as vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian movements. Site plans and elevations of grocery store before the residential component will be added is also provided. This was again in response to the Commission comment regarding what the building would look like between the time that the grocery store is constructed and the residential is added. More further defined unit plans have been provided, and more developed rooftop amenity area is provided where they identify a bocce court, vegetable garden planters, a covered outdoor kitchen, and barbecue area with seating. In addition, there was a discussion on how the delivery details would work for this particular grocery store. Keep in mind, we still do not know which grocery store, which tenant of the grocery store will be going in. But in terms of delivery, this is what we have. On weekdays, it will be 3:30 a.m. to 1 p.m., and on weekends, 4 a.m. to noon. There was also a discussion last time about the backup peepers. This has been identified as a concern for the adjacent residents, regardless of where the loading dock is located. And in response, the applicant has indicated that all the residential units on the north side of Parcel C, as well as on the east, south, and west sides of Parcel D, which is the theater site, would receive noise insulation treatments that would both block the railroad noise as well as the backup beepers. Do keep in mind that adjacent or kitty corner to the grocery store, you do have the Emmy building, which is almost constructed, so that's already there. I will now hand over the presentation to Arnold, our design consultant, who has been working on this project, and he will go through his comments, which have been outlined in the staff report.
Good evening, thank you. I'm not going to try to take up too much of your time. I want to point out a few things and let the project architect present their project. I just want to start with the current proposal. Just to note, I've probably seen this in the plans. On this one, you notice it does show the double entrance point into the garage, and it does show some slight changes in the layout of the building footprint on the Shellmon side of that. And I'll move forward, and you can see it here where they have the two entry points now. So it's a little bit wider than it was before, so there's a visual effect on the street there. And also the entry into the grocery store, you see it was previously curved at that corner. Now those two things have been straightened at that corner. So we'll come back to this. And there was one more townhouse along the 62nd Street side. So they dropped from like 8 to 7 on that side. The overview, this was the January study session, kind of overall massing as it faced the park. And I just wanted to point out, when you look at this one, you'll notice that the upper parking lot area, there's a few small structures there for mechanical and other types of uses for access. And then when you're going to the current proposal, one thing I want to point out is the amount of mechanical and the size of mechanical things has increased quite a bit, and so there's a concern about their visibility, and you see that they're on the front side of where the entry to the grocery is and possibly visible from Shellmount. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. This was the January study session kind of perspective, very nice perspective, and it showed kind of an intention to curve that corner so as you came down Shellmount, you get a real sort of good kind of identity to that building, and something at the top of it where it was sort of connected into it so that it would go through and up to the penthouse where the access was. Now this did show the areas to the side of that were open, and they've changed that also, but there's been some changes. Again, this is the January. You see the roof level configuration of the access down and the ground level, and then the elevation there. And you also notice on the elevation, at the far right side of the elevation, there's a brick at the corner. It's at the corner facing the park also as it turns that corner. Now you notice in the current proposal, it's changed quite a bit where you're not getting that curved feature. The building's been straightened out. The identity is not quite the same, and then the penthouse features are more of separate structures on the roof. So there's a concern that maybe it's taken a slight step backwards in this area in terms of how that experience might be coming down Shell Mound, and so that would be something that we just wanted to point out for your comment.
Can you go back to the January proposal for a second? I just want to, okay, thanks.
Okay. And that's how it is now.
On the January proposal, that curved screen on the top, was that to cover mechanical or what?
That was the entry, let's go to the, if you look at the top drawing there, you see the stair and the elevators, and they had the kind of the facade kind of continue up to sort of contain that on the outside, whereas on the current version, it's sort of a set back penthouse. See, now it's kind of just set back from that, and they also have a kind of a canopy created up there. This is just the elevation that's currently proposed, and the shaded areas up top, you can see where those mechanical spaces on the kind of almost at the center, and then the access point towards a little more to the right. And again, you can see in section where those things occur and the relative height of those elements. So that element seems fairly tall, so that's part of the concern also. Okay. And you're also seeing the grids that they put in to sort of mimic the window frames. That was a change from the earlier one, which is a positive change, I think. Wanted to kind of go over a little bit of the park side too. You notice here, this main point is the brick is at that corner, and it's wrapping the corner on the January, and then you have at the top, it's kind of hard to see, but you have a trellis that wraps all the way around the corner. And now on this latest version, that's been changed to more of a stucco presentation, so you don't have quite the contrast or the anchoring of the corner that you had on the other one. So to go back, hold on a second. There was the brick, and then the metal and the brick, and the upper floor was sort of set back and of a different material. And now it's sort of kind of blends in with the stucco. And then there was some concerns about how the development of those trellis elements really come across. They don't seem right now to be developed that much, and so we would be looking to see, well, what are those really going to look like? The other street, which faces Parcel D, so we have the townhomes facing each other, residential street. This was the January session. And this one, the main point I want to make is the way it was worked is that top level was kind of set back with a continuous trellis all the way along, so the scale was a little bit different. And so you had the more of a horizontal presentation. And in the new one, it's still attractive and has nice massing, but it's just a little bit different, and they're kind of accentuating the vertical elements a little bit more. And again, those trellises up the top seem like they're maybe just placeholders. They're not really quite what they might be. Also, on this one, I want to point out the window frames. This has that really warehouse type of aesthetic a lot more, and the windows look like warehouse windows. You typically would see those metal windows in this image. And of course, here's just the elevation. You see the pictures that go with it. They're showing some kind of typical window frames that you might see in that type of building.
Could you flip that elevation back to the January just quickly?
This?
Yeah.
That one?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want.
Yeah, I know it's a lot to. Okay, so I'll go back. So then, this is the current version.
Is the plan the same, or do the floor plans change too?
Floor plans, I believe, are pretty close, except for at the top floor, they're a little bit different. The units have been evolving. And in fact, I want to mention that as an aside, that some of the comments about the unit plans were actually in an earlier set of drawings than the ones that you did receive. So if some of the comments seem to make no sense at all, it's for good reason, because the units are different. So, but I think there's some, they're working on the units, and they're working on the massing of the building too. The one other thing I wanted to call attention to in this drawing is the entrances to the loading and the vehicular access coming in off of 62nd. Of course, it's much wider now, so there's some concern about, well, you know, you're breaking that pattern, and there's a door, I believe, on the loading, and we don't really have much information on what that's going to look like now, but they have gotten these two large entrances next to each other does kind of break that pattern a little bit, and that's sort of, I think, a constraint just has to be dealt with as best as possible. This image, recently I wanted to talk about this one briefly, and I believe, hopefully it's still current. You guys will correct me if it's not. This was from the end of February submittal. The two issues, this one. One is the windows. This one calls out as vinyl frame windows, so we don't have much information on those windows yet, but typically with the vinyl sash windows, without really seeing exactly what these frames look like and how they fit in, it's really unclear if they're going to really kind of portray the character of the structure, or if they're going to look like something different. So that's something that there's a concern to really clarify what's looked at there. The stucco and the brick and the setbacks, all of those things look like they're really positive features, give it a very urbane look to the building. Don't really know what the stucco finish is going to be like. That we're interested to find out a little bit more about that. But the windows are an issue. A second issue is the privacy, and so you notice that the units along the street, right now the plans are calling out of an 18-inch level change from the sidewalk to the unit, and what we don't know is 18 inches the minimum, the maximum, what that looks like, because there might be some sloping on the street. And 18 inches is not very much of a level change, so you're having the problem of people looking into the units. So our recommendation is to increase that to at least 24 inches, because we want the windows to be as big as possible, because they're very deep units and we want to get as much light into them as possible. Also around those openings, and the project architect might want to speak to this a little bit more, it's pretty open and there's not a lot of sense of visual definition or screening, not a lot of plant materials, maybe all clear glass right now it looks like. So we're not really clear how they're going to maintain the privacy into those units without it just becoming people closing their blinds. 'Cause pretty much what we see is people just close their blinds, and then all you see is blinds from the street. And so that's a concern on that. So this privacy on this would be something that we would want to see looked at, and preferably raising that floor level some. These are the current units. Only want to make a few comments. Now these are the ones where I was mentioning comments in the staff report were from a package that was slightly earlier than this, so it might not match in all cases. A little bit of a concern on some of the units that are, let's see, these are one-bedroom units. I really don't want to look at those. So these units are mixed up, but on the two-bedroom units, there's a concern about the table and the living area not quite being big enough to really function for a family. So you see that you have a sofa, and then you have a small table in there, and those dimensions are really tight to actually, get more people in that unit. And you might want to notice that, how little space. It's a pretty big unit, but how little space is actually ends up being in the living and dining. It's only about less than a quarter of the unit, like around 20% of the unit on the 2B example. So that's kind of a struggle point, and at least with those units, I believe they occur facing the park. There may be opportunities to modify that, maybe rather than a deck out there, maybe project out a bay feature or something like that to give a little more space to those units. This is showing some of the townhouse units. Before that, one of the things I wanted to point out with the slides out here is the Unit C. Staff really likes that unit. It's a nice elongated unit. It's a corner unit. It seems to be very well laid out for a family-friendly kind of living. And of course, there's 4 of those units, and they have about between the 2 and the 3 bedroom. They're about 38%, 39%, I think, overall, but it's mostly 2 bedroom. Lastly, just really quickly, this is an area that's kind of there's not much information on this first phase and how this is really going to work. We have a parking area on the back of the grocery store, and we have a loading dock and the garage entry. The discussion previously was to provide some sort of a kind of temporary facade, and right now we're just not really sure what that is beyond a concept. So I guess we're all looking for, more information there. I think that's as much as I thought would be useful to say, unless you have any questions for me.
Is there any kind of traffic study done yet relative to delivery trucks?
Well, I'm going to defer to, he's asking about traffic studies for the delivery trucks.
Yeah, we are doing the study. We don't have the results yet, but we expect that to happen very quickly. So, and we would have that cleared up before this project comes back for consideration.
So I think there were some recommendations and staff recommendations. One would be to maybe go back on that front facade by the grocery store to something closer to what it was. 2 would be to address the mechanical things that might be visible from the street. And then 3 would be maybe to go back to the brick on the corner between the park and in front of the grocery store, so it kind of gives a more balanced material presentation.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you can point me. I've kind of scoured the East Bay, and I've yet to find a good example of a project that has a sufficient grade separation for the ground floor residential units where residents feel comfortable opening their blinds. So I'm curious if you have a good example.
I think you're correct. It's very hard to find a good example. I think it's been an ongoing problem. The Essex project, I think, has that problem, and when I walked by those units, they're all kind of covered up. Now, people are renting the units. That's not an issue, but they're all sort of covering up the blinds. So it's a very common problem. I wish I knew one in the East Bay that really kind of achieved that sort of objective. And I think it's just something that we're struggling with right now.
Thanks.
Were your comments provided to the applicant, like, pretty recently, or did they have an opportunity to address them? Do we know that if they're working on some of these items?
The applicant received the comments at the same time as you did in the staff report, so I'm not sure whether they're going to be responding to that today or not, but yeah.
So we still have no elevations of the building without residential?
I'll let them answer that.
Yeah, this is what we have. At least that's what staff has. I'm not sure whether they have anything more than that today or not. But we would want to see that before it comes back for approval.
Because in effect, they could elect not to ever build the residential section.
That is always a possibility. So if there are no more questions of Arnold or myself, what we are looking in terms of direction from the commission is on the design of the building, of course, and particularly the unit mix, whether this commission is satisfied with the unit mix, and then also whether the commission concurs with the recommendations of our design consultant. So if there are no more questions, I will hand it over to the applicant for a presentation.
Do you have any information on what the rental rates have been, rent-up rates have been at Park on Powell, which does have 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units? Which are in greatest demand and which are renting?
Well, they have, what I understand, that they have already leased Building B, which is the one that is closest to Doyle Street. In terms of rents, I don't have that information, but they're very high.
No, but are there a lot of 2 and 3-bedroom units?
On that building, yes, there are a lot of 2 bedrooms. But again, the majority is 1-bedroom and studios.
Something related to that, I talked to the leasing person at the Essex building, and they said that they're renting the 2 bedrooms are going very fast, especially the corner units, and then the townhomes on the first floor rented up very, very quickly. And also they said they're not getting a lot of people with older children, but a lot of, they are getting families with young children, for whatever that's worth.
I have one more question for you. The ground floor units have 2 points of access. They have the front door on the street, and they have a rear door from a corridor.
Yes.
If that corridor access was eliminated, would all of the units, those ground floor units, would they all have to have level entries for? I mean, or how would the accessibility, I guess, requirements work?
Well, I'll let the project architect give you their take on it, but my understanding, talking to the city's code consultant, is that for 2-level units, the requirement is a 10% accessibility for 2-level units where they're served by an elevator floor. So I would think in this case they would have to have some sort of accessibility for wheelchair on some of those units, but the architect may have a different take on how that should be interpreted.
Okay.
The ADA requirements.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, with that, I think we'll invite the applicant up.
Very marked. That's right. Good evening, Commissioners. It's nice to be back in front of you again. As you know, this is I think the 4th study session we'll have had for this Parcel C. It's been a very good process, and I think it's helped us develop a project that is improved and has continued to meet the needs and the requirements of the community. We're hoping to gain sufficient feedback tonight from you so that we can make the required changes, and then we come back in front of you in May. We'll be in a position to get hopefully a final FDP. So we welcome your feedback tonight and help guide us where we need to be to get to that point. There was comments made about family-friendly housing, and the question or the comment that the mix that you have in your package has a mix of 30, I think it was 38% of 2- and 3-bedroom family-friendly. As you know, we've spent a lot of time working with the community to make a better project. And we've spent time talking individual members of the community, to the staff, to the Planning Commission, to the City Council about this issue. And we've taken it to heart. We think that of the 3 residential parcels we have, A, C, and D, C is the most suited for family-friendly housing, given that it fronts on the park and it's removed and sheltered more from the railroad tracks. Parcel A is not as well suited for family-friendly because it's right up against the tracks and it's right in the mix of the retail. But as it relates to Parcel C, we are going to increase the family-friendly mix to 57% from 38%, so that the 2- and 3-bedroom mix will increase to that level. And we're hopeful that that goes a long way in meeting your requests for more family-friendly units. And it's a balance for us because we want to have units that are marketable and the economics work, but we think this could be a good compromise. And then you'll see that later in the presentation from our architect in terms of how that mix might look. Also want to give you an update on the status of the negotiations with the grocery store. We've been going back and forth. We've traded a couple of lease drafts. They've asked us not to announce who they are until we have the lease finalized, but we're very, very close. They continue to have a requirement that we deliver the premises to them the end of 2016, and we need about 6 months to complete the working drawings and obtain a permit, and we need about 12 months to build the project. So that gives you a sense of the time frame that we're working under. And then lastly, I'd like to address a comment that was made with regard to the delivery trucks and the backup beepers. We have been designing A and D and C to mitigate the noise that's generated from the railroad tracks. And we're doing that through sound insulation and glazing and insulated glass. And we reached out to 2 different acoustic consultants to ask them how we would treat the buildings for mitigating the backup beepers from the delivery trucks. And they told us, and I have a copy of a letter that I'll share with you and provide to staff, that the requirements to mitigate against the backup beepers were less than what we were doing for the railroad tracks on the north, east, and south side. We would upgrade the mitigation on the west side, and that would meet the requirements and mitigate the backup sound. So I'm happy to share that letter from our acoustic engineer so you can see the results of that. And then as it relates to the Emmy building, which is already built, my guess is because it was built within the last 2 years and that east side of that building faced the railroad tracks, that they had most likely put in the same sound insulation in their windows and doors that we're planning to do. But we can verify on that. That's all I have right now, and for that I'd like to have Aaron run through the project with you, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us.
Thanks. It's nice to see you again. Clearly, you're familiar with the project as a whole, and I think, like Arnold, we'd like to just focus on what's different, how have we reacted. Right out of the gates, Commissioner Gunkel, we work constantly, so there are things in tonight's presentation that are not in your package and staff hasn't seen, and it's constantly reacting, and even the comment about family-friendly housing is as recent as 24 hours, and so we're working through what we can while retaining the basic tenets of the building, what we think is already successful. Where we're going is clearly this is the first big step towards creating a cohesive urban neighborhood that has all the pluses and challenges of an urban neighborhood. But our direction is to create a place that truly feels of the place and doesn't look like it's been dropped in from somewhere else. And so the character of the inside of the public market when the renovation's complete, or the base of Parcel B, or even Parcel F, or Parcel C on the upper right, is to try to create a connective environment that truly feels like a real place and not like a fabricated vision of some other location. The project, of course, has been going for a while, so the PDP approval dates to 2008. Mark and his team got involved a couple of years ago. We actually first came before you December of 2013 with a FDP study for a one-story grocery store and 30,000 feet. So some of the pieces have changed, and we've kind of plodding along trying to get clarity with the park approval underway. I think there's a lot of the pieces are starting to lock in, and now we're hoping to get the grocery store and road approved so we can get into construction later this year. There's clearly a lot of components, just kind of, and clearly all of these are coming at you at the same time. And so appreciate that when you give feedback to folks on Parcel A or Parcel D, that we're trying to roll that into what we're doing on Parcel C as well. So there is an LOI in place with this grocery store. Mark and I have visited several of their outlets. These are photos from their stores. It's a really terrific brand that's new to the Bay Area, and we think is a perfect fit for Emeryville. We put these photos together to highlight some of the things we think are a great fit for the public market as well as for Emeryville. They have a bakery on premises. They do prepared foods. Everything's sustainable and fresh and locally sourced. And the great thing about it is that they have 50 different delivery vehicles that come and visit them on a day, because the salsa comes from somewhere and the orange juice comes from somewhere. And it's not one big truck that comes from a distribution warehouse. Obviously, the challenge is that's 50 different trucks over the course of the day. They're not all big trucks. Some of them are pickup trucks. Some of them are vans that are just driving over the hill. So we're working with this, but we think the end goal and the sort of the end game for Emeryville is they get this phenomenal anchor tenant, which really is the catalyst. The project works because there's a great grocery store. The project has a lot of challenges without a great catalytic tenant in the early phase. So when we saw you more than a year ago, there was definitely challenges to loading, and there was, I think, a lot of feedback that a one-story building wasn't the appropriate density for this site. And so when we came back to you, it was a multi-story building with a residential wrapper. Again, we have a site with no backs. So we're, if you have no back, you have to have all front, which gets challenging with something like a grocery store, which, in our kind of conventional experience, always has a pretty unsightly back. And so in this case, the back is enveloped into a multi-use building. Some great feedback we got in January, which was, what is an appropriate family-friendly mix? Solving the deliveries is obviously a key component. There were certainly comments that the rendering at the bottom of the screen from January looked too much like a ballpark, or a parking garage looked too much like a parking garage, and that is the challenge. So a lot of our work has been, well, how do you make it look like a warehouse building or like a building that made sense in a place that has an industrial heritage and yet isn't an industrial building and isn't overly nostalgic. And then there's obviously the big outstanding question of how quickly does the residential wrapper come in, and what is its what does it look like in the interim? To just kind of tick through the changes, and I think they highlight a lot of the issues, and again, some of these are a couple of days old and some of them are 2 months old. So one of the staff comments which we appreciate is that, we looked at the myriad of delivery vehicles and how they might come and at what time of day, but key to that was, how does the occasional big truck get in? And by big truck, it's not even a really big truck. It's not the big Safeway truck. It's still a notch below that, a WB50, but it's still here. Yeah.
And by occasional, what do you mean?
Every morning, or most mornings, there's likely to be a largish truck. So, greater than 30 feet. So in our, in this, the red is sort of a bigger than a box truck. That's some kind of articulated truck. That's not a giant Allied moving truck, but it's
maybe not, now is not the time, but at some point, I think I, for one, would love to have you explain exactly how to read that chart.
Yeah. We'll come back to that. But suffice to say, for this sheet, there was a desire that the trucks not use the wide 64th Street and back all the way down Market Drive. It was to swing in from Christie or from Shellmound, and that there may be an implication on the bulb outs. So initial study, and I think this is for debate with the commission, is if a truck approaches from Shell Mound, if we shave the bulb out, I think you're all familiar with that term, on the south side of 63rd Street, and we do a little widening in and around Market Drive, kind of getting back to a similar width that it is today, then a truck of this size can be accommodated and back in, and then he can leave out Market Drive. So again, this is a several second back in to a loading dock with a gate. So the loading dock remains closed most of the time. Approaching from Christie, whether from the, again, it's really challenging from the south because of the tightness of these sort of pedestrian scaled streets. But if we shave the bulb out on the south side, which was put there to match what was being done on the north side, again, similar movements. So I think this feedback, which we got in the staff report late last week, we would certainly expect to apply to our updated package. The delivery schedule, and this is actually straight from the grocer with the names removed. So each text entry represents a different proprietor. So the bread guy actually shows up every day of the week. So do some of the other folks. There's like 7 different coffee people because there's sort of every different coffee person. And then these represent windows because delivery guys aren't always on time. So in this sense, this looks like a lot of red. It's only one person who delivers at some point over that window. And again, keep in mind, this is a delivery schedule for an urban store 1,000 miles from here and isn't necessarily representative of what would happen here. It's simply a communication tool that we're using to kind of see you through. But you get a sense for a series of morning deliveries of largish trucks, and the bulk of everything that shows up comes in small vehicles, vans, 20-foot box trucks, pickup trucks, and comes over the course of the day. So we've allocated some space on the street for that.
This schedule was provided to us from the grocer, and it is representative of a urban store they have and they operate. So, and they suspect it would be very similar here.
Does that help, Commissioner Moss?
Yeah, I think so. So I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. So so you said the red is the largest trucks. It represents the largest trucks. So am I correct then to say that on most days of the week there would be, in the morning, there would be 3 or 4 deliveries from those large trucks? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, up to probably 3 or 4. Right. And those are the trucks that would require use of the loading dock, and everything else, would fit in a parking space.
And some of those are windows too. So if you look on, say, the left-hand side there, it's really, you've got one, it's 2. There's 3 blocked out.
Yeah,
it's really 2 deliveries.
Right.
Because it's just a window of time. And if you go to the next date, there's probably 3 dates because there's blocks of time. There's a first block, the second block, and then the third block. Those would be the large trucks.
So it's certainly different than a Safeway, which gets a single truck every morning, typical, or 2 trucks plus all the other stuff. I mean, so much of a Safeway is supplied by a big truck, and those big trucks that you think about are typically bigger than these trucks. But again, this is still a little bit a model of another place that has a lot of similar qualities to Emeryville, but isn't Emeryville. So,
and part of the thing is that if you want this fresh produce and organics, you're going to have more deliveries because you have more providers. It's just the trade-off of that purveyor.
Oh, sorry. So we're thinking of it, and a big reason that we went to the second delivery bay, which Arnold touched on, was to anticipate conflicts and allocate space. And we think through design solutions, the gates, how the facade's treated, how the streetscape's treated, that it's a reasonable trade-off of 60, 70 feet of pavement for basically putting all these back-of-house uses behind closed doors. But it's the obvious trade-off. We certainly got feedback from you all that there were other ways to bring trucks in, and we really have belabored this. And there are pros and cons of every solution, and we as a team with our traffic consultant and in conversations with other, the people related to the project, it just feels like this is the best place, and we think this is a workable solution. Total change of gears, and in fact, a big reason why we go to great pains to bury trucks and service and trash deep into a building is that this is a phenomenal opportunity to bring family-friendly living to Emeryville. As a young family with a 1-year-old who lives 3 miles from here, and my kid loves to swing at Doyle Hollis, there's a lot of Emeryville that's not suitable for us because there aren't the amenities that we're now going to have because of the Christie Park expansion. So again, Parcel, the Essex building is a great beneficiary of this park, and Parcel C, to a large extent, is really the front and center on this great park. And so what we've done is we've oriented our family-friendly units, the 2 and 3 bedroom units, to the park to make sure that there is that connection and it's an easy way out. And so the bulk of what is seen here in the lower rendering are the more family-friendly geared units. Another question, and certainly there's been a lot of dialogue offline with staff and Arnold and others about how do you design more family-friendly units and what does it mean to have a family-friendly unit versus a 3-bedroom that's really great for a bunch of college kids. And frankly, what you do for a family is what anybody else would really enjoy too. There's a spacious vestibule that's big enough for a stroller. There's washer dryer. They tend to be, if they can be side by side, great, because there's more room. Living, dining, kitchen works. There's places to do homework. And so a lot of the revisions to our plans have been to incorporate these features at each step. Now, it's still urban living, and there are still some trade-offs that one makes to live in an urban setting that's different from a suburban house. But in large part, we think that the kinds of units and the space we're allocating and the dimensions we're providing are giving the potential for that. And then, how do you translate that outward? So one was to think about a roof amenity that was private to the residents, that took advantage of the views to the bay and the city, that took advantage of views overlooking the park, that had the kind of activities that we think folks who would tend to live here would want to do. And so it's space upstairs for a birthday party, playing bocce with your kids, just places to hang out or maybe have a little vegetable garden. And then a big change that has come into the plan in the last couple of weeks is that the grocery store, because it has a lot of prepared foods and fresh foods and it has kind of on-site cooking, would prefer that there not be a cafe next to it. And so, okay, that's challenging as a retail project, but it's also a great opportunity to improve the residential. And so what I'm showing here in the lower corner was all formerly the retail space, and the concept of adding an additional townhouse with the potential for an amenity. And this townhouse would be a 3-bedroom because it would take advantage of 3 bedrooms upstairs. And that would be a club room or a place to do, any kind of resident activity, but it would present itself to the street much like a commercial entity. So you'd have a great wall of glass and activity behind it. So this is not in your packet. This is literally the last couple weeks. We've added a unit to some unit counts. We'll show you where we've changed it. But generally, we went from 69 to 70 units with the addition of another 3-bedroom.
And we should probably add in with the change that we said we would make to increase the family-friendly housing, the unit count then drops, I think it's to 65.
All within the same envelope and basically the same exterior appearance that you have in front of you. We took a lot of feedback from January and other meetings around that same time that it was looking like a parking garage. And so one of the things we've taken a stride at is looking around Emeryville. Emory Tech does it well. We think we can do it a little bit differently. But to create a kind of a simple articulated facade that gets away from the typical proportions of a parking garage, because problem with a parking garage, it looks like a parking garage because it's very efficient. So if you take strides to change the proportions of openings and use materials in a way that doesn't look like a parking garage, it's really getting in and changing their proportions. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do. We also felt like more blue sky at the end of Shell Mound was helpful, and so we shifted the staircase. It also helped with the operations of the grocery store. And then it also helps us do kind of a Shell Mound door to the grocery store, the circulation, and the plaza door to the grocery store. And a little bit of that is evident above. I think Arnold's comments on the mechanical enclosure are appropriate. We were being conservative, and we made this extra tall to protect views from the neighboring offices, but we can certainly continue to refine how it presents itself from the street. In terms of what the back looks like in the interim, the objective is to deliver the shell of the grocery store to the grocer in January of 2017, allowing them enough time to fit out the inside and to commence work on the residential component within 6 months of that. So here they're showing, it's kind of showing a handoff. So you'd effectively go right into construction as soon as you got a temporary C of O on the grocery store. And if that's the case, we feel like there's really no need to dress it up because it's a pretty straightforward build out to frame up a stick residential wrapper. As a backup, and in the event that something goes awry, we thought that beyond a certain window, a temporary scrim, which is basically, we want to find an artist, find a design that's appropriate for this place. We haven't hazarded a guess on what that is yet. But here's a couple of examples of, I'm sure you all remember when the Washington Monument was reclad in construction scrim. This is not it. This is a different building that took the same approach. But there's a lot of flexibility that you have with these construction scrims. And the idea would be that something like this, which is not inexpensive in and of itself, would be a great interim solution to kind of tee up what's coming.
I mean, one of our thoughts is perhaps it could be a mural. Maybe we could get an local artist or the school kids or something to help us put that on. But our primary objective is to start the construction of the multifamily as soon as the concrete is finished around the grocery store. But as Aaron said, if for some reason this went on beyond 6 months, we would do some treatment like this. But it's not cheap, and that's why there's an incentive for us to get the multifamily started. Something like this could cost easily $300,000, so we want to move quickly with the housing.
So just the plan in your package is this one, and it, as I mentioned, created a second curb cut, if you will, for deliveries. And it's sort of oversized for the typical delivery truck, but sized for the largest truck to get in and the door to be able to close. We've shown trash, compactors, recycling, and all of those things within this. So when the door is closed, you really have no sense of all of that. As part of this, we created a duplicate driveway, effectively, for the cars. And in doing that, we lost a townhouse. We're hoping to pick it up here, so in a second I'll show you that. Some of the other changes, we got some great feedback from you on employee functions of the grocery store should have windows and really present themselves to the street to activate Shell Mound. So we've done that, and things from their lockers, their break rooms, those kinds of things are here overlooking the biofiltration treatment area. Other than that, the plan has stayed largely along the lines that we looked at a couple of months ago, with the exception that we've really refined how the unit plans worked and how there's a whole variety of them and how they play together. The plan I showed earlier, and let me just flip back and forth, takes the red where the hand is and converts it to a townhouse and a resident amenity room, which, for all intents and purposes, looks like a great coffee shop, but is really a place for residents to hang out and socialize. And we think that really does a great job of bringing residents, right across the street from the park and animating that corner without challenging any of the issues with the grocery store and other tenants in the marketplace. In terms of kind of loading and functionality, the public face of the grocery store is certainly on 62nd Street and Shell Mound. We've created kind of loading zones for customers, so they can pull in and pick up, or if you call an Uber, they can, or something like that, they can come and get you here without slowing down traffic. But the bulk of shoppers would come in and park, and if you've used the new Safeway in my neighborhood in Rockridge, it works pretty well. And it's all the kind of fears of going up and down an elevator or the grocery cart, I think, are sort of non-issues.
Well, the other important thing to point out is that there are close to 3,000 units, or will be, within walking distance of the grocery store. So we think a large percentage of the shoppers will come on foot. And one of the things that our grocer wants to do is hand out little pulley carts to the local residents to make that easier.
Generally the residential is addressed from the street. The lobby is across from the park. We thought that was an important address, that the lobby of the building beyond the park. There's a secondary lobby because of the length of the building that we thought, as a convenience, this would help. This lobby also buffers the residential a bit from the train tracks. Typically, it's all ground floor townhouses, and each of those has a stoop and an independent entry. Service, both utility and trucks and so forth, is organized right here at the end of Market Drive. This little mechanical, I just want to point out, is actually the mechanical for the office building across the street that currently lives in a bunker in the middle of the parking lot that needs to get relocated. When that office building was built, they just put it in the parking lot instead of in the building. So we're embedding it here in a new bunker. Going upstairs, so again, this is the double height of the grocery store. It's about a 22-foot ceiling, 23-foot ceiling. You're seeing that townhouse we added, which is 3 bedrooms on the upper floor overlooking the park. Generally, the beige is residential, and these are all the upper floors of townhouses on this level. In section, you kind of get a sense of how it goes. The garage is matched to the residential, so a typical residential floor to floor here might be 10.0, 10.6. Because of our garage, we're at more like 11.6, so the capacity for light to come in through the windows is significantly greater because our windows are that a foot to a foot and a half taller than you might normally get. So that's a convenience, so that residents can park on any level and can walk, right into their floor, but it has the upside. It also gets the residential building a bit taller to block any views of the parking from Parcel D.
Can you go back to the last slide for a second?
Yeah. Sorry.
What is that sort of blank space? It has a TH3 in it there on the.
TH3 is a unit plan that's not fully resolved. It's townhouse unit 3 that we know fits here, but it has a lot of wonky angles that we just haven't populated into the drawing. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. We know it exists. We just haven't figured everything out yet. On the 3rd floor, so again, this is the first parking level. The idea is that shoppers would have come up and arrived here. And this is slightly different from what's in your packet. And again, it's kind of the ongoing conversations of how do you deliver best-in-class grocery, best-in-class residential. And so everyone would arrive here. This floor would be primarily parking for grocery store customers. There would be a ramp up to additional parking. But if you recall in your packet, the ramps are both stacked in this area, and that really presented a challenge for residents to get easily up to their parking level. And so what we've done is reorganize the ramp. It cost us about a dozen parking spaces, but it's made a much more efficient vehicular circulation for residents and a number of office workers who will work across the street and park here. These are all flats, so all apartments. And then there's kind of nominal back of house space.
Would the residential parking be gated separate from the grocery store parking?
It would be. Great segue. So if we go up one level, this would be the 4th floor of the residential building. So residents would come up to this level, and then, again, this is an inefficient parking garage, but a very preferable residential scenario where there'd be gates and a key card access to get up to the roof, which is the residential parking. This floor becomes overflow for the grocery store, as well as spaces we can assign to the office building. Again, this is kind of part of managing the parking as a site. Again, it's similar residential flats, but slight tweaks, because there's ins and outs and lots of different things that we're doing on the elevations that affect how the units lay out. And so although 1A and 1E have different labels, they're very similar.
So the residential parking would be on the roof?
Yes.
So it would be uncovered?
Correct.
And what about guests of the residents?
We're still thinking through that. Right now, our intent is that the second floor would be for guests as well, and we're looking at whether or not there's a metering solution for the garage as a whole, of which the residential is kind of nested inside of, or whether this is just sort of monitored by people walking around, and so we're still managing, because we're managing the parking on the site as a whole, which is obviously a much bigger enterprise than just one building. And then the upper floor, as was pointed out earlier, there are still setbacks for balconies, and we've done it in ways to give kind of living rooms more privileged views and still kind of recessing back at bedrooms. And then finally, the rooftop level, where there are certainly, well, this is an important point. On the top residential level, we identified a pretty significant space for bike parking as well as mechanical, and we roofed that bike parking. So this big gray blob here is actually bicycle parking, not mechanical. The mechanical's been strung out here and here. It's not a very large building, 65 to 70 units, and so the amount of amenity space, we were trying to right size, and this seemed like the right size and the preferred orientation as opposed to this north leg, and so we've left this north leg as really just a second means of egress, and this would be where we'd focus activity. And we started to envision what it is up there and how it feels, and we think it can be relatively simple and have a profound effect. It's actually a rooftop right near our New York office that we looked down on, so we knew it well. We got a photo, and some other projects that we're pretty familiar with that we think were pretty successful. Without belaboring deliveries and all the various trucks, I think this just highlights again the challenge we're facing with a vehicle that's about this size. So this is a 40-foot trailer. So that's, the big trucks are 53-foot trailers, so we're still well below that. And what it would need to do to get in and dock and then leave afterwards. Again, as Mark said, the acoustical impact of a truck backing up for a handful of seconds it means the rating of the window is a fraction of what the rating of the window needs to be to mitigate sound for the railroad track and still deliver the same level of experience. So we're looking at Emeryville doesn't have a code yet on what that is, but we're looking at a similar rating to some of the neighboring towns here that have rules in place for this. In terms of elevation, it is very similar to where we were in January, especially on the 63rd Street elevation, where it's a mix of plaster, finish, brick, and standing seam metal. One of the comments we received from staff at the last round was that the windows of each type should be a little different, so we've gone to a different window articulation in the metal facade areas as opposed to the more masonry facade areas, and that's similar to these two pictures. We are developing this at all levels, so we're trying to give variety to the building that privileges certain units so that there's a variety to the experience of living here, and it's not just a repetitive sort of same unit stamped out. And so where we can expand a bay, create a terrace, or where we can pull the building back to create a terrace, we've tried to do that. I think, generally we've said 18 inches minimum grade change from townhouse floor plan to street. I think the comment to go to 24 inches is great. Anywhere over 3 to 4 steps starts to be a little bit sort of arduous to bring groceries in and other things. I think maybe my years in a 6th floor walk-up have ruined me, and I think 3 steps sounds terrific, but appreciate that there are trade-offs to privacy living on the ground floor, and so if 24 inches is preferable, that's definitely something we can accommodate. You know, the idea is that we're creating a very residential street in 63rd Street. It ends with the park, and the entire experience here should be about connecting back to that park. The south elevation of the grocery store, this is actually a picture of one of the grocer's stores here on the right. This is a couple of buildings in San Francisco near our office, which we think do a really handsome job of relatively simple plaster with other articulations of steel and the occasional and glass and metal. We're developing this. Again, one of the trademarks of the grocer is a freestanding green-roofed canopy. And so in an earlier presentation, this was a canopy hung off the building, and we've moved away from that to do a freestanding canopy over the entry along the 62nd Street area, because it's really one of their signature items, and it has an added benefit of helping us mitigate some stormwater issues. You have a sense of the way we've used metal and different shapes and articulation of structure to mitigate that normal parking garage feel, and we think it's starting to feel like a real building that you can park cars in. And again, the idea is as you come north on Shellmount, it's still very clearly an urban setting. It's very visible grocery store, but you get a little bit more blue sky than we think we had before. The other facades have gotten further development, whether it's the typical back areas like the employee areas of the grocery store, which are now more fully glazed. Even the staircase, the secondary circulation element for the residential, has windows, albeit to the train tracks. And then we really like the balance of kind of more brick on 63rd and more plaster on 62nd with elements crossing over between. And so that's why we moved away from the brick here on this corner. I'm not going to belabor streetscape, but we've definitely it's not overly generous, but we think there's enough space there for residents to have a little planting area of their own, as well as the enhanced kind of streetscape planning that we'll be doing. So again, in the event that the residential building is not immediately green lighted, the idea would be to put the curb in place so that it feels finished on 63rd Street, and that we would then kind of break through the curb, so there'd be on-street parking right away, and then we'd break through the curb, do some temporary parking up against the back of the garage, and then we would cover the delivery area in the interim until the residential building can be built around it. And so these are crude. We didn't want to get into what the mural might be, but everything hatched would be under the mural, and you can see the doors to the loading areas are already in place, and here they are built out. So the intention is to conceal all the things that are meant to be concealed right up front, and then cloak this thing in a very fun, whimsical, appropriate kind of scrim, and we'd expect to come back and review that as part of our larger signage package anyway.
But the intent is to start the residential as soon as the retail's finished. That's what our plan is. This would be a backup plan if for some reason the economy fell apart.
Just a little bit on Unimix. So I think the package you have is the top mix, which has a mix of studios, 1s, 2s, and 3s, and that's around 38% family-friendly, if we say that family-friendly units are 2 and 3 bedrooms. The version I presented today, which had that additional 3-bedroom townhouse, is substantially the same, 38, 39%. Those family-friendly units tend to be more park-facing. The mix is, again, so the ground floors are pinkish because they're townhouses. The upper floors are bluish because there's flats. We've used corners for 3 bedrooms. We've found spaces for 3 bedrooms where we can. And then the update that is sort of fresh off the press is that we could go to 65 units instead of 69, or actually 70 in the last one. And in doing that, we would convert a number of 2 bedrooms, especially park-facing 2 bedrooms, or sorry, 1 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms. And so we could bump the overall mix of family friendly to something like 57% by ratcheting down the overall unit count. And we think, you know, this does make a lot of sense for this site in particular because of its relationship to the park. And so in doing that, we've now got an additional, we're up to 5 3-bedrooms and a number of 2 bedrooms. But it becomes a building that's much more about families than it is about singles or young couples. That said, we still think studios, which are shown closest to the train tracks, and 1 bedrooms are helpful to create an overall balance as a project. And yeah, I think the market comps, certainly around town as well as around the Bay Area, support that. There's a lot of unit types. So this is the unit types in the building. And I think you pointed out, Commissioner Moss, that there's 1 missing. But it's not easy to make a building look interesting from the outside if you use all the same units. So we've explored a number of ways to change, and each floor has a different. So these tend to be townhouses here along the bottom. So even though that townhouses all look similar, there's actually 5 types of townhouses. There's a number of different 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom plans depending on what floor you are in the building to take advantage of different site conditions. And then there's a series of studios and 1-bedroom plans. We certainly looked more seriously at a lot of the comments. We had always anticipated some sort of covered entry, but now articulating a little glass and metal canopy over each townhouse stoop so that you do have a dry place to take your keys out of your pocket and come in the front door. We're certainly exploring different ways to manage how the stairs and the elevation change works. Within the unit themselves, we've really looked seriously at how do you create those kind of nooks for studying, for TV watching. One of the things we've done in these townhouses is eliminated the corridor on the 2nd floor, so the townhouses are extra deep on the 2nd floor, which creates this great little study alcove or TV room or whatever you have, which again is it's that second space. So you can have friends over on the ground floor and your kids can be upstairs watching TV, but not in their rooms. And we think those second spaces are pretty valuable. Again, subsequent to some of Arnold's comments and kind of always going on concurrently, we have our interior designer who's gone to work on furnishing all of our plans. And so these are sort of, we haven't moved the walls, but it's another level of refinement of how people live in these spaces. And you start to see, with really ample seating groups, that these are very generous apartments. And the kind of room that you have for strollers and other things that are just facts of life as a young family are accommodated here. So in this case, the ground floor is really kind of more formal living. The upstairs has more of, in addition to kind of the 2nd bathroom and the laundry room, which has even a counter space in it, it has a full den off of so in this case, this is a master and a secondary bedroom. There are iterations. So on the end, this is on the 63rd Street, we have an opportunity where the townhouse abuts 63rd Street. So we flipped the plan and created more of a bay window with a staircase. Again, so you've got more light, more air, and that changes the unit plan upstairs. We have now 2 conditions with a 3-bedroom townhouse where it's, again, very similar living plan on the ground floor, but 3 bedrooms upstairs, and again with the sort of family den. And just as a kind of refresher, as you get into the world of flats, these tend to be always facing the park. The subsequent revision we made was to take these 2 1-bedrooms and make them a 2-bedroom and a 2-bedroom here and another couple of 2-bedrooms here. And so it's like, how do you translate all those great family amenities to a flat, which doesn't always give you that luxury because it's all about how much frontage you have. But by locating a 3-bedroom on a corner, we're able to maximize. So here's a kitchen, living, dining with windows facing 2 directions. All of the bedrooms kind of stacked off of each other and efficient and sort of away from the public space approach. Here's a 2-bedroom, much the same way, where you come into a kitchen, living, dining, and the bedrooms are off to the side. So you can entertain without people feeling like they're walking through your bedroom. Refining furniture plans for unique conditions. Again, we're trying to understand where we have a bay on a floor, we can have a living room kind of pop out versus where we don't. And so It's just as the floor plans react to the buildings. Upper floors with great covered terrace versus lower floors that get just a little bit more interior space. Just versions of 2 bedrooms, all of which are applying the same principles that we think are working really well. So without kind of belaboring all that, I just kind of want to come back to the schedule and to say that, you know, our hope is to really get into the ground on the street later this year, and then to go full blast on the grocery store at the start of next year so that we can hand it off and follow quickly after with the residential. Meanwhile, you know, there's other projects on your docket, whether it's Parcel A or Parcel D, and the hope is that all of these are into construction sooner than later. So thanks.
All right, questions for the applicant?
Do you have any knowledge of any soil problems on this site?
Yeah, the site sits within a deed restriction, as does the road, and we have a pretty open dialogue with DTSC and have been working through the implications of putting these uses on this site. It was always anticipated in the PDP, and you know, it's an ongoing process, whether it's the park or Parcel A or Parcel B. So a big reason this is an all above grade scheme is that going down is expensive and challenging, which Essex certainly figured out the hard way.
Mm-hmm. Where are you in the process of the traffic study?
We have delivered everything, and I believe they're working.
We should be getting the first draft of the traffic study on Monday. I see that we are still working on the circulation itself, so, you know, probably all that will have to be sorted out before the project comes for any kind of approvals.
That include the delivery issues?
Yes, so we are constantly getting the updated information, so, you know, we'll make sure that the most, you know, as much information that they can give us, that will be examined.
This delivery option is with them. The only change that they wouldn't have seen was the upper floor parking circulation. So.
And Meru, the traffic study is for, does it take into account the entire development and proposed or projected truck trips for the retail areas, the other parcels?
Right, so the traffic study is also being done for parcels A and D.
Okay.
And it's the same consultant, obviously Fair and Pierce is doing that. So they will be taking into consideration the whole project and not just Parcel C. Yeah.
And they looked at this about a year ago when we first came back. So this is really just an update to the report they've already done.
But it's not a single study for the project, is it?
No.
Just to clarify that, the study they're doing now is just for Parcel C and B, I believe, right? It takes into account the other parcels, but it's not a study of the entire Marketplace PUD. We're doing separate traffic studies for Parcel A and for Parcel D, which also will take into account the other parcels.
Okay, then that leads me to another question then for find my parcels. So the parcels that have retail, have you received information on truck trips for those spaces, or at least a projection of what kind of truck trips you'll have for deliveries for the retail spaces?
I don't believe we have. Not for retail space for B.
What we're assuming is that that's typical. These are small format retail, 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet, and then we've called out essentially 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 6 restaurants. And so when we gave that information to the traffic consultant, and we ran our own traffic consultant, so they have that mix.
Okay, thank you.
But just, you know, to clarify, March of last year, Fair and Pierce issued a report on all of these same land uses with the only difference was that 200 parking spots that are now shown on C were formerly shown on B. So
Yeah,
they're studying the same thing over. It's just a refinement to get the nuances. And they've given us a lot of feedback already, like, you know, adjust this curb to accommodate the FedEx truck to deliver to the residential.
Right.
So it's you're seeing the benefit of a lot of that, and there's certainly a refinement coming.
Right. And what's triggering my question is that for the grocery store, you have this delivery schedule throughout the day, and that's really, really helpful information. And I think the more of that type of information we can get for the other spaces, the more accurate your study will end up being.
There's sort of a general expectation in terms of what restaurants and retails deliver. We've not leased any of the space, and we're not going to be able to till it's built, but there's a general delivery schedule. Most of the smaller spaces will have FedEx and UPS, and we're Parcel B, they'll all be loaded from the back, so it won't be street. We've got a loading access for that, so we're dealing with that. The loading for the existing retail happens along actually Marketplace, the back there. So, but the consultants deal with that, and I think they understand the typical delivery patterns for this type of retail and restaurant use.
So this is a study session for the FDP for Parcel C and Shell Mound.
Correct. So Parcel C and the realignment of the street.
And by the realignment of the street, I mean, I saw there's a bunch of drawings in the back that sort of get into Shell Mound striping and bike lanes, and all of that's part of this. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, what about the plaza, what's been called the plaza, the area between the public market and Parcel C? Is that part of this?
It is part of this FDP, correct.
To that end, I mean, we're in the weeds with Maurice Kaufman and others about the details of the street. So.
And we didn't go into detail tonight because we've presented it several times before and it hasn't really changed. And we've incorporated your comments, but we're welcome to hear and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you.
So I would point out also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this FDP also includes Market Drive between the park and Parcel C, as well as 63rd Street from Shell Mound to the park.
Yes.
Right.
So essentially, it's the same as you saw in the January study session, except for the garage. That is Parcel B.
I'm not going to show you this. It's in red.
The schedule of the garage now comes after building F, is that right?
Right, what is phase 1 of Parcel B and phase 2?
In order to manage the parking, because
Parcel A,
we're a challenged site, so we're going to build a garage in 2 phases. We're going to build the north half of the Parcel B garage in the first phase, and then that'll create parking reservoir, and then the second phase will be built immediately thereafter.
But you'll be doing away with the existing parking lot for Parcel A before the garage building is completed?
That's right.
Won't that
But
create-
we've managed the parking, and we can share that with you. We have a study. We've Nelson Nygaard, who you're familiar with, and they've made presentations to you with regard to this project. We had them carefully study the parking phasing, and we have a phasing plan that we can share with you.
Earlier, you had been talking about the park going in as the first phase. Why did it get bumped?
That's that wonderful thing, parking again. So we need the parking on the expansion area until we complete the other spaces above the grocery store.
I'm struggling a little bit to picture the trellis with the green roof in front of the grocery store. Do you have any? I couldn't find it on any of the renderings or anything like that. Or do you have an image of similar anything?
Yes, and it had a big sign that called out the name of the grocer, so I took it out of the presentation. Let me. Yes.
It's basically just sort of grass is what it is.
It's a painted black steel trellis, not unlike some of the awning pictures we've shown. Sorry, not trellis, not the right word. It has a roof, and it's I'm trying to get
like
to
an
an
awning,
image.
really.
Yeah, so it looks like this from the side, where you have a C channel that kind of runs around the outside of it. It has a series of steel posts, and then it has kind of a grassy planting on top that we're hoping we can, which is how they've done it before. We're hoping we can improve on that and introduce some color.
Okay.
But
And it looked like, from what I saw, that there would be awnings underneath it. Is that correct?
well, the idea is that on this side of the street, it would be this covering the entrance, and then as it turned the corner on the shell mount elevation, would have awnings suspended off the building.
Oh, okay.
So they'd have a similar detailing, but happen in different places.
Okay. You mentioned that the grocery store was not keen on the idea of a cafe next door to them. I noticed that on the plans that space was labeled as retail. Is that, were they also not keen on retail?
No, the problem is that space doesn't really work as retail, because if you look at the plan, it's divorced from the rest of the project, and sort of the retail energy happens along Shell Mound, and this is off by itself. And it wouldn't work. It would be an empty, vacant space. So the only possible use would be a restaurant use, or a quick grab-and-go kind of food or coffee use. Coffee doesn't work because we've already got an exclusive with Pete's, so we can't bring in another coffee user. And we were concerned about this being a space that would just not be utilized, wouldn't be leased. And then the grocery store has an issue with regard to food, because they're planning to have, within their store, they have presentation where they create different food products to go and eat and take away. And they didn't want to be competing against somebody right next door to them. And they're also concerned about the parking that might demand from a restaurant. And it would take away from the parking that they have. They're already going with an urban-oriented parking count. And this was something that was very important. And we've talked to them about this issue many, many times, and it's something that they have not wavered upon.
So on the grocery store floor plan, at the front of the store, there's a little dashed-in box that says purveyors. What type of use would that be?
Yeah, so each of their stores is a little different, and it's sort of tuned to the neighborhood that it's in. But the consistent ingredients that they've talked to us about are a bakery, so they do bake on site. They have a kind of a funky coffee breakfasty place that tends to be in the front, or in all their stores. It always has a glassy seating area. It's pretty cool. And then they have a line where you can get sort of Mexican food or Asian food, and they'll cook to order. And so it's kind of like Mi Pueblo meets Whole Foods. But anyway, so when we say purveyors, the idea is to, sometimes those get buried in the back of a store. We want to pull that to the street and really have that participate in what's going on in the marketplace already.
Cool, thanks. And then I have a couple more questions. So the amenities for the deck area for the residential, I was wondering if you could describe those a little bit better. I was kind of struggling to figure out how some of them would function. In particular, the what's labeled as covered outdoor kitchen and barbecue seemed, I counted like 22 seats at it, so it seemed rather, I mean, you could use it for a large gathering, but it seemed like maybe it would be more well utilized if it was broken up into two smaller barbecue areas or something like that. So I was curious how you envision that being used.
That's a great comment. Yeah, our experience is that they are really popular with birthday parties for kids of all ages, and grown-ups too. But I think your comment on scale is a good one, and we could certainly balance that. I don't think there was, we were sort of drawing something that felt pretty good in terms of picking up the space, and it got to be 22 seats, and we probably didn't step back and think about that enough. But at any rate, the idea was to zone the plan in a way that you had a kind of more adulty area with a more sort of family area, and then kind of kids of all ages area. But these things get colonized all different ways.
I was also a little concerned perhaps about especially if we're going to be increasing the number of larger bedroom, units with more bedrooms and larger units with the goal of having more families in this location. I was a little bit concerned about the fire table and whether that might, was safe for children, or, I've never seen one of those in this kind of environment, so.
Great question. I'm just thinking about my son right now. I don't know. I mean, they do have that little glass wall around them, but
Oh, okay. I've never seen one, so I don't know.
it's a fire pit. It's like a designer fire pit, really.
Okay. And then my last question is actually sort of the same question that I asked the design consultant. I was wondering if you could address that. If the redundant corridor access was deleted from the ground floor units, how do you view the access requirement, and how would you comply with that?
The collective experience of the architects working on the project, so parcels A and D and us, is that Fair Housing Act, as soon as you go to a building of this type, they look at accessibility to all units. So even though 10% is the normal rule, they end up knocking you for all of them. And so the prudent thing to do is provide that as a matter of course, and then design to invite people in the front door off the street. But that's, believe us, it's an added cost for sure. And it does have the benefit of being able to take the garbage out and other things.
But it sounds like then you're looking at it from an accessibility from a guest standpoint, because in the townhome units, all the bedrooms are upstairs, right? So they're not accessible for a resident.
Right, but even the ground floor powder room is sized to an ADA bathroom, which is significantly bigger than. Let me just get it off the hook. So, this is a powder room, accommodates a wheelchair that you certainly wouldn't need to design to. In fact, as a matter of course, we're, as a group of architects, designing all of these to those standards, so all of our bathrooms tend to be more gracious than you would kind of otherwise do in a standalone townhouse, simply because they're in a building with flats, and the implication is that you'd be held to the same standard.
So are you doing universal design on most of these units?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all these different words. We just sort of design so that all those things could accommodate. So in earlier versions of the plan, you'll see a bunch of dashed rectangles that represent all of those kinds of dimensions. They didn't make it to this version.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, in looking at this delivery schedule, there are areas where it looks like there would be potentially 2 or 3 of the large trucks that need to use the bay, and then there's another category for using the bay if it's available. What is the potential for stacking of these trucks? What is the situation where somebody's using the bay and someone else is going to be trying to get there?
Where do they stack?
Yeah.
Well, the way that
How do
you
you
manage that, and the way we've managed it in the rest of our projects, is you have a dock master or somebody who coordinates the deliveries, and certain vendors are only allowed to come at a certain time, and if they come late, they're waived off. And so you coordinate those deliveries so you don't have that issue, and that's the way we've dealt with it in our projects.
But I mean, as a designer, we toured all these projects and scratched our heads and said, how do you do it? They've never provided more than one. And they realize it's an issue because they're in urban sites. And so the dock manager actually manages to a much finer grain than that schedule would imply. So I think, obviously before they open, that similar schedule will be built here and it'll be much more thought through. But I think the idea is the understanding is there's no room to park a truck in the middle of this project and have it loiter in that way. So whether there are underutilized streets down the road, or they just stage their deliveries differently, I think it's a heavily managed operation.
The other thing is that it's the incentive for the delivery folks to be in and out in a short time frame, because it's time's money for them. So they want to make sure they hit the windows they're allowed as well, because they want to get in and get out. They don't want to spend an extra hour there.
Well, you do have one commercial loading strip on the street.
Yes, we have commercial loading here. In addition to this bay, the compactor is only at the end, so we have additional room here for pickup trucks and vans. Everything is a little oversized, so we think we've got room to accommodate this. And based on their other stores, of which they have several dozen, and never provided this nice of a serviced area, they're really excited.
I would say we have 3 times the available loading area than they use in their other stores.
At least.
And the residential loading that's shown on 63rd Street, that's going to be restricted to residents, or will it also serve commercial loading when?
In terms of, this is sort of move-in area, and this would be pickup drop-off, and so we would stripe that short-term loading, unloading.
Any other questions?
Chair Moss?
Yes.
I had a question for the applicant. As you were considering alternate uses for that corner retail, did you consider childcare as a possible use for that corner?
We have not considered that.
Would you?
I mean, it's everything. We take a look at it, but we made everything boils down to making the project viable, and we made a major move to increase the number of 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, which makes the project less viable. And we're dealing with some other, we mentioned before, the skin costs around the parking and such. So I can tell you that the parking, just to clad that, is costing us almost 30% more than we'd pay for a normal clad parking structure. So there's just certain elements what's the most important components to have in this project?
Since you mentioned the cladding of the garage, I think it was Parcel B, there was a garage and there was cladding there that we looked at a while ago in another study session, and I remember the feedback being pretty positive from the Planning Commission on the design that you did there. So I'm wondering if you looked back towards that design to see about incorporating that into this. I see some
I wish you'd been
looks
here in
on your
January.
faces. So, and how does the cost compare to what you're planning for the other parcel that we liked?
I think the consensus in January was that we have a lot of work to do on that garage skin, and our research points to there's sort of a bare minimum cost to do anything, and it's pretty significant. And so the more you enhance, the more expensive it gets. So we are looking at ways to maximize the appearance. And so we're using all that research. We're thinking about it. We think this approach is a good one, and it reflects some things that have been done around town pretty successfully, and we think it builds on and improves those. In terms of what it actually costs, it's significant. I mean, over at like the Chiron building, that's obviously a very straightforward way to go. And some of the buildings at Mission Bay are obviously very elaborate, but have the benefit of a very large institution. So.
Yeah, the other thing too is that the design that we chose for Parcel C, we feel matches the aesthetic we're looking for, more of an industrial look with the windows and such. And B, in some ways maybe is a little too flashy, or it's just it attracts too much attention. We want the eyes to be on the retail, and the above just kind of disappear, and that's really what we're trying to go for. And we have to come back to you with Parcel B, and the benefit of what we're learning with C will hopefully manifest itself in how we come back to you for B.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Great. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so with that, we will open the public comment period for this item. So if anyone would like to speak, please come forward.
Before my time comes, can you turn the overhead?
Very good, thank you. Good evening, Chair Moss and Commissioners. As I've talked to the neighbors in my community and my building at Pacific Park Plaza, I'm Stephen Keller, a resident at Pacific Park Plaza, and other residences in Christie Commons, we really like this project, and we would really like to see it move forward as quickly as possible. But I still have some serious issues with loading dock on the north side of the building. In the same PUD, we have buses traveling down Shellmount Street and stopping traffic throughout the entire day, in both directions, and somehow that's not a traffic problem. But delivery trucks entering a dock at 6 in the morning when traffic is minimal is somehow more serious. The thing about the sound attenuation that they're talking about, the insulation, is many of us, as you know, living in the Bay Area, sleep with our windows open. Once you open a window to your unit, you've completely nullified any insulation that's been created, so that becomes a moot point. So anyone with their windows open at 3 in the morning when these deliveries starts are going to be woken up in the morning, and they won't be able to go back to sleep. So this is a drawing that was done by an architect that lives at Christie Commons, Rod Heim, and he shows a drive-through delivery. So entering the parking structure in the same location, trucks can pull in, they back up within the building so they don't create any bother to the neighbors, and then they exit the front of the building towards Christie Park and then exit out Market Street, and then they could exit out to that way. Rod said that he had given this to the developers and as well as city staff, so I'm a little disappointed that it hadn't been brought up yet tonight, but I think this is a very good option and something that should be considered. So in different subjects, I'm thankfully there's been this third consideration for the parking. In addition, architectural styles of the townhouse, I think, are a modern interpretation of the industrial style and provide a good transition between the original brick warehouse and the existing office tower. And I think it's a very good plan, and I like the interpretation. I think the windows, being the great size that they are, make great connections to the surrounding area. And someone who probably will spend the rest of his life looking at this project out my window, I really rather like it. But I definitely do think we need to see the return of the brick on that corner that they had taken away. I think that really kind of made the project a little cheaper. And lastly, as for the temporary installation on the north and south sides of the grocery store, I was thinking maybe that there could be more of a permanent solution in nature that can reside on this parking structure temporarily, and then become part of a more permanent covering on the east side of the parking structure for the garage on Parcel B that faces the railroad track. So they could do something here on this garage that could then be transferred over to the other parcel and become something more permanent. But those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Any other speakers? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public comment, and we'll bring this back to the commission for discussion. Commissioner Gunkel, do you want to kick us off?
Sure.
Oh, actually,
Go ahead.
sorry. I want to. I just want to kind of make a comment about procedural items before we get started. So I think that I think we've heard a lot of discussion already about unit mix. And we've heard some of the applicant's thoughts on that. I think that they are looking for some really clear direction for us, so I would just encourage the commission to try to give them that direction. I just want to be clear that at this time, we don't have a policy or a regulation related to unit mix, and I don't want while the staff may be in the process of embarking on the road of drafting some draft policies, and our comments might inform that. I just didn't want anything that we said tonight to be construed as any sort of policy on that. So I just wanted to make that comment, but go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I commend you guys on the progress you've been making. As I looked through the drawings, I started kind of accumulating a list of some comments, and then I have to admit, I looked through the drawings first, and then I read the staff report, and I saw that a lot of what I had been thinking had actually already been covered by Arnold, which is great. And so I would say in our staff report, items 1 through 5 that Arnold listed are all ones that I agree with in some way. I liked the curve at the corner, and I liked the penthouse popping up at that curve. I felt like that really kind of, I felt like that could have gone further, sort of like make it kind of more of a sort of a centerpiece of that transition right there, and instead it sort of went the other way, which was to remove the penthouse or pull the penthouse to the side and remove the curve. And so I would encourage you to kind of go back to where you were before and maybe take it a step further. And I agree on item number 2, relocating the mechanical room somewhere so that it doesn't distract from that corner. I agree with 3, returning the brick facade on the southwest corner. 4, using smooth textured plaster. And then 5, the use of metal windows, or if your intention is to use different windows at different areas where the walls are finished differently, to kind of show us what that is. I would assume that the areas that are brick, where you have the more factory appearance or blending, taking the style from a sort of a more industrial building, that you'd use metal, aluminum, windows there. And if you were going to use vinyl, that maybe that would be in the other areas where you showed the white vinyl sample. Item number 6, I don't know if that's the most important thing to me, the extending the planter along the north side of the roof. Item number 7, and I on Doyle Street, I run past a place that has the stoops at least 30 inches above the above the sidewalk, and their blinds are always closed. And honestly, I think this gets to the heart of when so often nowadays we put the living, it used to be that we had the kitchens always at the front. Then for, more recently, everyone's switching, and, for quite a while now, the living rooms are at the front of the houses, they're the units. And the reality is when people are in the living room, it's a more private space. People don't necessarily want to be seen sitting there in their boxers watching television, whereas if they're in the kitchen standing up at a sink looking out the window, their eyes are on the street, they're less concerned about being seen themselves. And so I think that is pretty much at the heart of what causes people to have their blinds closed, whether or not they're 30 or 18 inches above sidewalk level. And frankly, I think it often feels kind of strange and forced when we do raise them up too high and have them 30 inches above sidewalk level. In addition to those comments, I would like to see what the temporary screen is, as much as I appreciate the fact that the schedule shows the housing construction starting immediately after the grocery store is occupied. I think there still lies a possibility that we could see the back of this for years, and maybe it could be built into as a condition of approval that if the housing construction hasn't started, say 6 months after the certificate of occupancy for the grocery store, then this screen would have to be installed. But I'd like to see what that screen is, and I'd like for us to be able to approve it before then. I appreciate the alternative unit count that you proposed, that sort of increases the numbers of 2s and 3s. I guess I'd still love to see it increased even more, but I definitely appreciate the direction that you're going. I didn't notice it in your slideshow, but definitely in the drawings that we were provided, unit plan 2A was kind of what we've been trying to move away from, where you've got 2 bedrooms with 2 bathrooms, and they're each sort of on opposite sides of the living area, creating kind of a optimal environment for two non-related adults to occupy the space in more of a dormitory style setting. I would like to, I mean, being that the plaza is part of this component that we're looking at, I'd like to see that fleshed out more. I'd like to see, you know, I think Planning Commission seems, or at least a lot of us seem to keep bringing this up and viewing this plaza as this public plaza, the pavers, and very rarely occupied by motor vehicles. And I want to kind of get to feel what you're looking at it as, and how that works. Is the entire thing raised, and then the transition into the park is raised with that table? I know that's sort of what you're showing, but just to get a feel for what that plaza is like. On Shellmount, I'm still seeing that one crosswalk by Parcel A, not at the grand stair to the up to the bridge, but instead further to the south, which doesn't make sense to me, and I'd like to see it at the grand stair. Let's see here. Yeah, I did like the idea of the cafe at the park, actually. I understand the dilemma. Right now, I feel like this small club room at the park is kind of a throwaway space that might occasionally get utilized by the residents. And so I'd like to see some studies and thought go into, if it's not going to be a cafe or retail space, how to really activate that space. I think that's all my comments for now.
I'm also very pleased with the way things are moving along. I think you have been listening a lot to the comments that you've been getting, and I do also agree with pretty much all of the recommendations on the building design from the consultant. I think one of the ways of dealing with privacy from the street level, I don't think it needs to be raised a huge amount. 18 inches is probably a little bit short, but considering some other kind of translucent glazing on the lower parts of the windows so that there's functional privacy from eye level from the sidewalk would be helpful. I would love to see something done on the roofs so they're not just raised parking lots that people are looking down from other residential areas, from offices, or from anything that's taller. Whether it's solar panels or some kind of trellis system or some kind of green roof systems on top of that, I think we need to do something more than just have parking and lighting up there. Solar or green are both good. I also do prefer the presence of the grocery store with the curved entry and with the entry on Shellmount. I think that when you come in that angle and when the street is bending, that it is much more, it feels much more like a place to have that facade wrapping around a little bit better. I'm hoping that the Farron Pierce report will really look at the transitions on the cycle track on Shellmount, where it's going from being outside, the possibility of it being a protected cycle track, and where it's going in at the bus stops. Those kind of transitions, I think, are really tricky, and they're concerning me, so I would like to see a little bit more analysis of that. And I thought that the drive-through loading bay was a really interesting idea, and I know it takes away from ground floor uses, but in a dense area like this, the idea of the beepers and not being able to open your windows at night is really, it is concerning. And I know that there are people up the street across San Pablo that are now grappling with a business that has deliveries starting at 3:30 and 4:30 in the morning, and they're in front of the Oakland Planning Commission, I think, right now, arguing about that one, because it's really disturbing to people in the morning to have those kind of early deliveries. I like the way that you're articulating the surroundings for the parking. I think that it looks much better with the divided frontages than it did with the horizontal kind of screening on it. I like the way that that's working. And if the brick wraps around, I think that the materials that you're using are really getting richer and that it's giving a nice look. I'm not so crazy about the metal facades on it, but maybe if I see more detail of that. It is really important to see what that transition is from the marketplace alleyway to the plaza. I think that that's a really, really primary part of the entire project, and we need to see the detail on that. And I'm glad to see that you're adding more of the larger units. I think that that's the right direction to go. That's what I have for now.
Okay. I too agree that the project is really, really fleshing out in a nice way. Just to add to some comments, hopefully that haven't been said before, the unit mix, I definitely think it's a great idea to go from the 38% or whatever it was before to the 57% of family-friendly housing. The only comment I would have there is that there be more 3 bedrooms as opposed to, quite a bit more 2 bedrooms, which is what you're showing now. For the clubhouse resident amenity space, I think it'd be a good idea to consider another resident amenity such as a workout room and make it more use than just, an occasional rental of the clubhouse. Yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit more on what Commissioner Gunkel said about the activating the sidewalk space where these townhomes are and how we see the curtains drawn so much. And I think, and we talked about this at our last meeting on another project, and we talked about orienting the kitchens more towards the outside so that would keep people from drawing their shade. So I just want to reiterate that we should consider that, and that's something that you may want to consider. Maybe not necessarily for every unit, but for some of them, and just maybe experiment with that. It may just be the solution that we've been looking for. For the parking lot, so I was concerned that the residents don't have covered parking, and so I think that it's going to be important for you to look into that and consider providing some covered parking. Also, up on the roof, you're going to have, a lot of heat gain there. So the material there, definitely look into something that's cool, like a cool pavement. Emerald Cities is working with Lawrence Berkeley Lab to develop and promote their product. They've used it, and they've shown that it reduces the need for parking lot lighting by 30%. So that's something that I think you should look into so that the residents that are parking up there won't be so exposed. So maybe a combination of covered spaces as well as not having, very heat absorbent parking lot material. And then as far as the design, I think that it's definitely coming along. I think that the southwest corner, and I'm repeating what other commissioners have said so far, should retain that brick facade. I think that really will really keep the project quality on the upside. And a unit mix. I had one more item, but I think I'll come back to it. It's not coming to me right now.
Well, I agree with most of the comments I've heard from my fellow commissioners. I do think a curve at the front entrance would be good. Where the club room is located, which used to be retail space, I think that might just as well be another townhouse unit. It could be a large one. And at this date, it may be difficult to do, but I think the townhouse is located on 63rd Street. That space might be better assigned to the grocery store, and at least on the first 2 floors. And then deliveries could be made right off the street in front of them, and it would just, the townhouses on that narrow street are more likely to have their curtains pulled because there's nothing to look out at except the street and the building across the street from it. And whereas the townhouses on the west side do overlook the park and on a less traffic street. So that would be one of my suggestions. The other thing is I do think the tenant parking should be on a covered floor. The customers for the grocery store are in and out, and so being in an uncovered location is more acceptable to them. And I do think it still could be covered by a trellis or something, but that it's open to the weather for the residents of the building. My comment.
I also agree with a lot of the comments that have been expressed already. I want to thank the applicant for kind of the direction you're going with this. I think you have put a lot of hard work into it and really taken most of our comments to heart, and it's really encouraging to see that. I'll start with a couple of easy comments. I think there needs to be cart storage for the grocery store on all of the levels of the garage that will have grocery store parking. I noticed it shown on the first level, but not on the second. And I don't think people will be willing to take a cart down a level when they're done with it. And then, in addition, I don't think you have any, but I want to make sure that there's not any outdoor cart storage planned. And I would just really encourage you to work with your grocery operator to make sure that all of their different carts have been planned for. I worked on a Safeway project where there was plenty of cart storage area that was designed into the project, but then lo and behold, when they started operating the store, they had all these weird oversized carts for kids and all kinds of things that didn't fit in the cart storage areas, and they ended up in the bike racks and all kinds of places. So that's my comment on that. I want to talk for a minute about the streets surrounding the project, particularly Market Drive and 62nd Street. I share Commissioner Gunkel's desire to see how 62nd Street will function as a plaza. I really am very eager to retain its ability to do so. To me, it seems like a very redundant street. So if it's needed for emergency vehicle access, then by all means we can provide that. But if it doesn't need to serve passenger vehicles, then I don't see the need for it to do so. And to that extent, I think that the one-way, well, actually, 62nd Street, I would like to see the one-way reversed and have Market Drive, then one-way, all of, one-way heading, what direction is that? Toward 63rd. For the entire length. What I'm trying to do there is that right now, if you turn onto Market Drive from 63rd, you're then forced onto 62nd because it becomes a one-way street. So I don't want to have vehicles that are forced to use 62nd because it just becomes more difficult to block off 62nd for temporary events or things like that. You would then have to block off Market Drive, or at least a portion of it as well. So I think by reversing the one-ways, it would serve the project better. Or alternately, I think you could reverse my one-way proposal on Market Drive simply by restriping the angled parking that is down on the private portion of it in front of the existing marketplace. You could reverse that and maybe play with that as well. So I just encourage you to revise that. And then as far as the loading dock, I was really encouraged to see the drawing that Commissioner Keller or I'm sorry, Mr. Keller put up on the overhead. I do feel, I know you've explored a lot of options, but I feel like maybe we haven't seen them, because I just, when we keep looking at options for the loading deck, I can't help but think that there are other options that haven't been explored. And one thing that I keep thinking of is, for example, and I realize this might increase the frontage of the loading dock, so there are trade-offs. But have you looked at angling the loading dock to limit the distance that trucks would have to back up, and maybe they wouldn't have to make a kind of a 3-point T-shaped turn. They could just pull past the loading dock and then back up into an angled loading dock. So, just as an example, that's something I would like to see you explore. The proposal that was shown on the overhead, that may or may not be the answer too, but I just feel like there's something better out there. This is a good start, and it's definitely better than the original proposal. I think we're gradually getting there, but I would like to see some additional options as well. I also agree with the Commissioner Donaldson's comment about covering the rooftop parking. I made a note, my note says rooftop PV. I think that's a great opportunity for that. You could, provide a significant amount of the energy for the grocery store by doing that, and cover the parking at the same time. So it seems like very much a win-win. And I agree with most of the design consultants' comments, especially related to that corner of the building that's been brought up before. I think that there needs to be an emphasis on that corner. It is what you're going to see when you're coming down Shell Mound, whether you're driving or walking. It doesn't need to be something as dramatic as a tower feature or anything, but I think there does need to be sort of an emphasis and a focus on that corner of the building. In my opinion, it would be a fabulous place for a blade sign that advertised the grocery store, but that's something you can look at or not. And then also, I very much agree with the comment, the suggestions about the trellis from the design consultant. I think that the trellises that we saw in January were much more sophisticated than that which have been shown on these plans. They looked like maybe they were metal trellises or something that was intended to mimic that, and these trellises on these plans look very much more basic than that, and so I would like to see that sophistication brought back to the trellises. And I think as I think Commissioner Tan said, the brick facade on that corner by the park, I think, is also important. It really provides warmth. I think that's a very important corner for the building, and just without a significant amount of that brick, the other colors of the building start to look drab, and so I think it needs that warmth. That warmth of the brick really enhances the other materials. With that, I think my last comment is about unit mix. So I will just say that I was kind of thinking of two options to improve the unit mix from what was in our packet, and I'm happy to say that one of my ideas is basically what you presented, so that was good. I was going to suggest basically that the ratio be flipped instead of 60-40, 40-60. And that's basically what you've done with the 57%. By adding, if you could squeeze in 2 more, you could get to 60%, which I think looks better on paper. But I really appreciate your efforts to increase the mix as you have. The other option is so I do have a question for the applicant. Do you now have a development partner to build this residential component?
We We are talking to a development partner, but we've not finalized anything yet.
Okay.
But we're hoping to do so.
Okay, thanks. My other idea was actually to look at this project as part of the whole marketplace project. And the goal really is to increase the mix of larger bedroom units on that scale of the whole project. And I thought it might actually be to your benefit and provide some flexibility to bank some of those larger units here to perhaps free up the mix that we might want to see on other parcels. What I mean by that is perhaps there's an opportunity to make this parcel C, essentially 100% 2 and 3 bedroom units, with a development partner that builds that product type. I mean, it definitely is a product type that exists. And, whoops, what happened to our screens? And I think by doing that, I'm not trying to segregate different populations or different uses, but I think in as much as you can kind of cluster them, it provides some opportunities. For example, even though we have the park across the street, and that provide, that's going to provide a playground and some recreational opportunities for families and young children and children of all ages. If this site were to accommodate all 2 and 3 bedroom units, then perhaps the outdoor amenities could have more of an emphasis on families and all ages. And there might, the child care that was brought up by the staff might then be a perfect fit for this building and other sort of components like that. Like I said, I think we're looking at overall unit mix, so we don't want to give up on this goal of having a high amount of units that could accommodate families. But if this site took the majority of that, then, as I said, it might free up other parcels to have less, and it would all it would balance out to a good mix that we're looking for. So anyway, that's the other option I would provide. So I think that concludes my comments. I think there may have been some other comments as well. Did anybody?
No, I don't have.
No?
It was covered, thanks.
I did just want to say I love the idea if it could be made to work to have a drive-through loading zone, but I don't necessarily like the idea of an entry or exit for that loading zone being right off of the park on Market Drive.
Yeah, that was my concern as well.
Yeah, I agree.
And another comment that was brought up was just I can imagine it being pretty frustrating if you live on the first floor and you have to drive all the way up to the roof of the parking and then get in an elevator and go all the way back down to go to your unit, especially if those are the most family-friendly units and you've got your kids and your stroller and everything else. I think shoppers will be more forgiving if the first floor is a bunch of reserved parking spaces and they just know they have to go up to the second floor and beyond.
Oh, I did have one more comment, actually, and that was I would like to see that redundant corridor access eliminated from the ground floor townhome units. And my solution to the access would be, I mean, we've sort of heard this struggle of getting people that inhabit those units to interact with the street anyway, and when we've heard this potential solution of perhaps bringing the kitchens up to the front, So I would just propose that all of those units just have flush entries, and
Not be raised at all?
not be raised at all, because I think the minimal amount that they're raised now doesn't really serve them well. And have that rear corridor access eliminated, which would give more space to the units, which would make them more family-friendly and do a lot of things, so.
That means they'd have to go outside to get to the trash room, they have to go outside to get to the elevator, and, you know.
Yeah, that's what I do now. I don't have a back door that goes anywhere.
Address the commission, respond if you.
Please, please feel free to respond to any of the feedback that we've given you, and if you don't feel that you have clear direction on anything, feel free to ask us also.
I think generally, terrific feedback, totally on point. I mean, our own self-editing points to a lot of the same things you were saying. So I think a lot of it will just be in the next set of drawings you see. On the loading, you know, when we started this parcel, it was sort of, all right, what are our priorities? Priority one, grocery store at the end of Shell Mound Street, infinitely leasable, great identity, terminates the street, very urban. Priority two was respecting the park and really creating an address on a park, because that park creates terrific value for the residential, not just on Market Drive, but the entire building, because their address is Christie Park. So we got a chance to review that drawing after the January session, and I appreciate the suggestions, but it really seemed that a better objective was to make the park residential relationship strong, and not to allocate so much space to a service function. I think if we could find, whether through clarity or management, another way to address the concerns of deliveries at limited times a day, then I think that would be a more agreeable solution for us in terms of kind of physical allocation of space. But you know, it obviously needs you to go along with that.
Yeah, just a couple other thoughts too. As Aaron pointed out, the grocery store is a very important component of this project. It really is what is the driver for the rest of the retail. If we're unable to have the grocery store, we're not going to get the rest of the retail. And the retailers we've talked to in restaurants have made that very clear to us. And one important aspect is parking and availability of parking. And the grocery store has been adamant about the fact that the parking needs to be directly above the store. All the rest of their conditions are like that. We've addressed the access to the residential by basically what amounts to a speed ramp almost, where you come to the second level and you can shoot right up to the third. I can tell you, I've done retail for a long time, and I can tell you if we put the grocery store parking up on the top, the grocery store release will never happen. We've struggled with this, and we understand the complications, but as you know, this is a complicated project, and we're trying to balance the interests of all components so we can actually bring a project that meets the needs of the community. You know, in terms of the delivery times, I agree we could maybe see about limiting those somewhat, that maybe that works better, so it's not waking people up at 3 in the morning, and you know, maybe that's something that, you know, they don't start till, I don't know what the time is, but not 3. Thank you.
All right, is there any remaining comments or anything from the commission?
I just wanted to comment on, so your idea of these units that front the park and eliminating that corridor, I would just add to that, if that's an option you're going to look into, that you consider having, I'm not saying that I support that, but if you do look at that option, consider having some dedicated residential parking along Market Drive, because now they don't really have, I guess, access from the parking area.
Well, they would just come down in the elevator, right? They just wouldn't have the access to the back of their unit.
Well, all the units above it would, because they have to. It's just the unit, ditch the townhouse units on the ground level.
I still think that the townhomes on the ground level would be because they're eliminating that, or you would be eliminating that corridor, it would just make their unit a bit more desirable if they could be at least closer to you know, to their cars.
The problem they have is with the building itself, because those bathrooms, et cetera, have to stack over one another, and they wouldn't, because they'd be pushed further back over the corridor on the floors above. So it doesn't really work mechanically.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much. All right. Yeah, do we want to take a short break?